Hello and welcome to another episode of the Parenting Teens podcast. We are back with today the conversation of safe space for talking to teenagers. Because having conversations with teenagers and young adults, for whatever reason, whether it's stress, anxiety, depression, suicidal awareness, or whether it's more sensitive topics like teenage pregnancy, STTs, drugs, smoking, alcohol, like the list goes on. The pitfalls of being a teenager are endless. And being able to have these conversations to navigate your young to mature teenager or young adult through these years with as much safety as possible really does depend on your ability to have a powerful but gentle conversation with them in a safe space. So, my name is Kay Reeve. I am an emotional awareness expert. And this comes from a story of years of raising my son through suicidal depression and trying to help him through all of those years around his emotional pitfalls and, very dark times, a lot of stress, a lot of anger, until I eventually came up with a way to teach him to understand his own emotions. And I realized he couldn't understand them because he couldn't see them. And I don't talk a lot about this on my podcast, but I'm going to bring it in today. Brain Unchained is the book that I wrote after helping him. And the emotional cycle diagram is what I developed to help him see a way forward with his emotions. But one of the things that I want to bring out of that is that to have those conversations with him about emotions, I had to switch from a parenting role to a mentoring role to be able to sit with him and say, right, let's learn something new today. Let's talk about what your problems are right now. Not something that he's going to address in an appointment 6 months down the line with some GP or psychologist he doesn't even know, and he's just going to not even respond to properly because he doesn't trust them. Especially being on the autistic spectrum, it's hard to engage with somebody new that you don't know and just open up to them in a 20-minute appointment. And so, as a parent, I was his constant go-to source. But, we had years where I was shut out from his life, and I mean years, where he didn't want to talk to me, he didn't want to trust me. And I had to learn the hard way about creating a safe space for him to talk. And this was so powerful that combined with the strategy in my book, when I started bringing that to him, it made all the difference. Now, the safe space I'd learned, and I'd learned to use that to draw him out of the depression over and over and over. But it always jumped back in. It was like saving somebody from drowning, only for them to turn around and dive back in over and over and over. And we don't want that for you. If you're going through that, believe me, I know the stress that it comes with. I know as a parent how that affected me, how it affected the whole family, let alone the impact it had on my son and his childhood. So, coming back around to safe space for talking, if this is something that you think can be powerful for your teenage or young adult, listen in because we're going to be talking about this for about the next 20 to 30 minutes. So, first of all, let's have a look at what might not constitute a safe space for talking. And when I'm going through all of this topic, there is no judgment on you and your current parenting skills. And I'd like you to also listen to this without putting judgment on yourself. If you hear something that you're doing, do not blame yourself because the chances are you're doing what was done to you by your parents, from your grandparents, from school teachers, from managers at work, right? Our culture has been such a strong blame culture in the UK that it pays down through generations. And we're going to try and turn that around and move forward into this whole concept of a safe space. So, no blaming yourself. This is about learning going forward and breaking the cycle. And when you focus on that, the breaking the cycle, and not on the blame and the judgment of the past, it's powerful for you as a parent as well. So it takes away some of that stress and it empowers you to help your teenager or young adult. I'm going to repeat them all. So from this point forward, I'm going to say teenager, but it encompasses more mature children, younger to older teenagers, right through to young adults, probably to mid to late 20s even. Some even older, depending on challenges they're going through with their health, mental health, their neurodiversity, their social challenges. I mean, my children are now in their 30s and I still support them with some of their challenges, but the more we can enable them to deal with their own, the less we need to support them, but we're still there to do that. Once a parent, always a parent. That's how we want it to be anyway. We know there's a lot of parents out there that do not follow that through, but let's make it possible for you to be once a parent, always a parent. So what does not constitute, as a safe space for talking? A good way to start is to think back to a time when you had a problem, whatever the problem was, whether it was about your homework, whether it was about dating somebody, whether it's about getting a job, whether you had a problem with your push bike, something with clothing, you had a fashion issue, maybe it was about puberty. But think back to a time when you had a problem and you didn't know what to do about it and had to speak to an adult, or felt like you needed to speak to an adult, but were scared to do so, right? You were scared to speak to an adult because of they might shout at you, they might laugh at you, they might make judgment about you. You might have been grounded. You might have been banned from doing something. They might have told you can't go to that party. You can't speak to that friend anymore. You can't wear that dress. You can't buy that bike because this one's better, and so on. And you think about when you wanted to have that conversation with an adult and you feared all of that coming back at you, you start catastrophizing over what this conversation might entail. Now, either you're going to go into it with a very high level of anxiety, which is what we want to avoid, or you might have avoided the conversation altogether and tried dealing with a problem on your own without getting relevant help, and it ended up making the problem worse. Or you might have tried seeking support from peers, same age group as you, who didn't really know the answers because they haven't got any more life experience than you had at that time. And so when we can put ourselves back into that situation as teenagers and young adults and say, okay, what problem did I have? And why was I afraid to go to my parents and ask for something, or afraid to go and ask my teachers for something? Or a time when you did go and ask for something and you got mocked or judged. Like the time I asked a tutor, my careers tutor, for a form to apply for sixth form. And she looked straight over my head and said, I'm not wasting a form on you, you're too stupid, right? How do you think I felt next time I needed to go and ask that teacher something, right? And it's all of these examples, when we think about them in terms of what we went through as children, let's now take that into how that can support our children. And actually another one might be, when you go to your children, children come to you and they ask for your help and they say, I need help with something. And then you take control. Like when you asked your mum, or your dad, I really could do with some help with this. And you've asked for help because you want to learn. You want to know how to do this for yourself. But instead of teaching you how to do it, they go, oh, it'll be much easier if I do it myself, or just let me do that. And you can't do that. You're no good at that. And it just, they take over. And you're like, how are we going to learn if you always take over from me? Right? So if you find your teenagers coming back at you with these responses, like, oh, you always shout at me, or how am I supposed to learn? Actually, there's a clue here in something in which we can not judge or blame yourselves, but learn and move forward. And so now I want you to think of an alternative, a time when, whether it was a teenager, adult, whether it's at work, whether it's a friend or a partner, and you had a problem and you turned to somebody to have a conversation, a chat with them, and you trusted them, right? I want you to really think of somebody who you spoke to because you knew they would listen. They would not laugh at you. They would not mock you. They would not judge you. And they would not tell you what to do. What they would do is listen, keep an open mind, hear your side of the story through, and may offer some suggestions that you could go away and try without taking over. Can you actually feel the difference in these different narratives? Right. Take a moment to sit and think. The person who laughs, mocks, judges, takes over, right, demands, controls, organizes, versus the one who listens, open-minded, doesn't mock, doesn't judge, hears your side of the story, and offers suggestions, not orders. Who would you most likely go back to with another problem? And I think it's pretty clear it's the one that listens. And that is what we call a safe space for talking. So let's look at why this safe space is so important in helping your teenager. So whatever their problem, I'm not even going to go into examples, but whatever their problem, there'll be something in your mind with your teenager. Process this with that in mind, something they may be going through, right? They come to you with a problem. Now, they are trying to grow into mature adults. And the chances are at some point you've told them they've got to take responsibility for things. And so they've got something that they want to take responsibility for, but they don't know how. So it's one thing we tell them what to do. Grow up, act your age, right? Get yourself out of it. We give them the what to do, but what they also need sometimes is the how to do it. And that's when they ask for support. How can I achieve this? Right? How can I get to this place? How can I pass that exam? How can I cure this health issue? How can I manage this social situation? How can I get the job that I want? Right? How can I learn to drive? All of these questions that they have. How can I earn some extra money on the side? All these questions are a how. Now, when they ask you how, it's not the same as saying, or mum or dad, can you do this for me? All right. That is them asking if they can delegate a problem to you. But when they ask, how can I do it? What they're really asking for is support or instructions. But instructions are not the same as orders. Orders is telling somebody what to do. Instructions are giving them a set of guidelines to follow. And so when they come to you with a how can I achieve whatever this is, they're asking for gentle support and guidance. And it's so important to hear that underlying message, right? Because if we don't teach them the how, they're never going to learn. Now, I had a really good conversation yesterday on my other podcast on the Self-Help Bookshelf channel with Rory Lemon about circles of influence and circles of control. And I talked about this on my podcast last week as well, about what is in our control, What can we influence? And then there's an outer one, circle of concern. If it's in the circle of concern, there's a problem. Is it your problem to deal with? If it's no, do you need to walk away? It could also be if it's not your problem, but it is your teenager's problem, which is very different where we're talking about it for personal development for adults. But if it's your teenager's problem, it might not be your problem, but it's their problem, and it's respecting that. If they're saying how, then it's about you moving into the circle of influence, right? Mum, how can I blah, 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 right? They don't want you to come into the circle of control. They want you to influence them so they can be in control and they can control their own life, their own journey, their own destiny. And that is what helps build trust. So by being able to have conversations in that circle of influence with teenagers and young adults about all kinds of topics, whatever they are, whatever you might learn that your teenager could be getting involved in, all kinds of unsavory things, because we know the world is a dangerous place out there, all kinds of risks that we really don't want, ideally, teenagers learning about, let alone getting involved in. But the nature of the world is right now, they do learn about it from peers, through school, through the social media, through TV and news. But what we want to be able to do is empower them to be able to have conversations to stay safe. And if they do find themselves in precarious situations, to be able to talk about how to get out of them safely. Or whether it's just a genuine problem, like I have a social issue, somebody's bullying me, how do I deal with this? They're not saying to you, I want you to go and beat them up for me or go and talk to the headmaster. They're saying, I want you to guide me to be able to deal with it, until they get to a point where they actually say, I want you to do that for me. And so having this conversation with them in a place where there is no judgment, and there are times when you will really want to make those judgments, but remember they are yours. Those judgments are your thoughts and feelings and beliefs. And imposing them on your child or your teenager can actually be quite harmful and break that trust for them coming back to talk to you again. So as hard as it is to swallow, hold those judgments. And it might mean going away and having a conversation with your partner, the other parent, or somebody later on, and airing out how to deal with a situation if you're not sure. And again, going and receiving support. But building that trust is the most important part. So it's being able to say, okay, I will listen with an open mind. Whatever they want to talk about, they need to know that when they talk to you, you are going to accept that conversation without having a reaction about your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts, because they are yours, not your teenagers. And it can be very difficult at times not to impose them. But it's really important we don't. And when you learn to hold that control, and it takes practice, but when you learn to hold that control over your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, you will, I guarantee you, you will really value the conversations that come from your teenager in their place, right? And so it is that listening, open-mindedness, not sharing that judgment, and then being able to support and guide them until they actually get to a point they say, I can't control this, I need your help. When the word help comes in, or equivalent in your child's language, then's the time for you to look at how much to help. Maybe even only a small part, not the whole situation. But by doing this, this is the really powerful bit. By doing this, we are empowering them to gain control of their own lives, because we want them to grow into mature adults. where they're not going to just grow up and leave home and fly the nest and never come back and talk to you. We don't want that. We want teenagers that trust you and will always want their parents for the right reasons. But not only that, there are a lot of parents who feel like they've got to control and manipulate these things because they're afraid of the empty nest part. But here's something really powerful, right? Here's something even better. Rather than them having to come back to you for problems because you've always solved their problems for you and then given yourself a purpose in their life and disempowering them, which is what we don't really want. And it's no judgment if you have, because this has probably been done to you. It is a way of life, again, that gets passed down generations. But rather than having it that they come back to you because they need you and they can't cope without you, imagine if your children came back to see you because they wanted to and they love spending time with you. And when they do, you're not solving their problems, you are enjoying their company. Because that is the kind of relationship you want with your children by the time they grow up and leave home. Now, it is not an overnight thing where you make changes and all of a sudden that whole dynamic changes. It's a gradual process. My children are 30, 32 now, and I still support them when they ask for help. Now, there are times when I do have to take control of things. My daughter's a single parent, and if she is ill and her children need to get to school, I've got a grandchild who's type 1 diabetic. So she can't just get anybody to come and help because someone has to be responsible for him. So sometimes I have to go and take responsibility. And I don't like the word control. I like the word responsibility. And so I have to go and take responsibility for getting my grandchildren to school safely, but also acknowledging that I am a backup carer for my grandson, while also empowering my daughter to rest and heal and recover so she can then take back control of her son's care when he's home after school. And so it's about looking at how responsibility and control and support and help are all fluid. So it's not always about giving up everything. But at the same time, my daughter and I, when the children are with their father, we will sit and play games or we'll go out somewhere. And we spend time together because we want to, not because we need to. And that is much more enjoyable. And when they grow up knowing that they want to spend time with you, it's much better quality time too. And the same with my son. You know, when I have to go and babysit, it's one thing to spend time with him then and great to spend time with the grandchildren. But when we get to visit each other because we want to, it's far more powerful. It's far more enjoyable. And that is the power of growing through these teen years with safe spaces for talking. And the other one is basically because there are things like the risks of teenage pregnancy, right? If a teenager does not feel comfortable coming and talking to a parent, how are they going to manage that pregnancy, right? How often have you heard in the news about babies being left in cardboard boxes, in dumpsters, in carrier bags, in the park somewhere, or in a bathroom, on a cold bathroom floor, because a teenage mum or a young adult mum has given birth secretly and not known what to do with the baby? Can you imagine the absolute fear and terror that she must be going through? Imagine if that was you and you were 15, 16, 17 years old, right? And you were so afraid to talk to your parents that you would rather go through 9 months of pregnancy and give birth in a park or on a bathroom floor than receive support from your family. Can you actually imagine what it takes for a teenager to have so little trust in their family? It's horrifying, right? And too many teenagers are living on the streets, in hostels with other relatives and friends. because parents just don't know how to have these safe space conversations and how to rebuild trust. And believe me, it's no judgment on the fact that it's not happened to now for many parents, because there were times when I didn't know how to do it. And I had to learn this. And that's the whole reason I'm doing these podcasts, is not to criticize, not to judge, not to blame, but I want to help you learn going forward. Now, if this podcast episode has been helpful for you, please let me know. Like, subscribe, follow, put a comment below, share it with friends, other people who may be struggling, other parents, at the school, in groups that you go to. Please share, because this is crucial, really crucial. And some of these parents that are having these challenges with their teenagers are actually decent parents. They're not bad parents. It's not about people being down and out and in poverty and bad people. Actually, some really wealthy, top level people can be going through this with their teenagers too, right? We've all seen those movies where people can be so rich and so wealthy that they're controlling, and they seem to think that they can't give power to their children, that they've got to control everything and order them what to do, and you've got to do this at university, and you've got to take over the company business, and you've got to study to be a doctor or a lawyer. And that teenager doesn't have a safe space. And one of the best movies I've ever seen for this was Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. There are loads out there, loads and loads and loads, and most movies have got that child somewhere in the cast and the dynamics. But Dead Poet Society, if you really want to learn the disempowerment that it gives a teenager or a young adult by controlling rather than giving them a safe space, that is one of the best movies going for that. And another one is Good Will Hunting, how he'd had that upbringing without that safe space of adults to talk to, in an abusive background, and without parents that supported him, and how the therapist had to retrain him how to trust and how to have those conversations in a safe space for him in a therapy office. So it's not even about levels of intellect, but in Good Will Hunting, he was a really intellectual lad, right? He had a super brain, but his emotional awareness was very, very low because of an abusive background. And so it's not about class or gender or ability or disability or neurodiversity. It's not about inclusion. It is about literally the bond between a parent and a teenager, child, teenager, or young adult of any age, anywhere globally, because we are all human beings, right? Every parent is a human being, and every teenager deserves to learn emotional awareness, and they deserve to be listened to in a safe space. So really do hope that has empowered you as a parent today to consider differently, or to work forward in a way that empowers you to rebuild trust and bonding with your teenager. I am so passionate about this, about what I do with the emotional awareness, because I know the difficulties I've been through. And I know that when things are going wrong for teenagers, how stressful it is on the feedback. But rather than, as parents who didn't get the emotional awareness training, keep paying forward that trauma and the control and the manipulation, let's break the cycle. Let's create a new generation that are empowered to keep empowering more people. The only way we are going to change our culture is by changing as individuals. And that is my motto. My quote is, mastering life is all about mastering change. And change begins with every individual. And for teenagers, very often that individual might actually be the parent that needs to change first to help the teenager change through their teenage years and their problems. So thank you very much for listening today. I think next week, if I'm up for it, I might start to look at suicide awareness, or no, sorry, depression awareness, So depression and suicide awareness in next week's topic. It's a difficult one. It's hard going, but I think it is absolutely crucial that we look at what suicide and depression are, what the signs can be, how we can approach that, and how we can start to use these topics we've already had about the circle of control, circle of influence, and safe space, and how we can use those to start lifting teenagers out of that depression, out of anxiety, out of stress, the pits, rock bottom, stuck in a rut, whatever they're in, right? Whether they're closed doors and stuck behind the crime scene tape behind their bedroom door, whatever it is, let's start looking at the signs so that we can start saving lives from early on with this podcast series. So thank you for listening today. Don't forget, as I said, like, subscribe, comment, share, everything you can. And also today, I had the most empowering conversation, the most amazing talk with a guy named Cuddy Cudsworth. And he's the UK's leading mindset coach. And I talked with him on his podcast today about the backstory of raising my son, about how I came about writing Brain Unchained and developing the emotional cycle diagram. And that will be out on Friday. So I will link that below here as well, probably. And I will share that in my Facebook group. And I will tag it in somewhere on my YouTube channel as well. That'd be the best way. I will tag it to my YouTube channel so that you can see that as the backstory as well. It was a really powerful talk. Other than that, I'm going to be away for a couple of days. I'm helping one of my mentees with a book launch because I help other self-help authors as well to help other people, because I believe in the power of the ripple effect. And that's another talk I'll do later down the line, the ripple effect and top-down learning. It's all relevant. But I'm going to be away for a couple of days helping with a book launch and doing a business pitch, because this strategy, the emotional cycle diagram, this needs to be shared. It needs to help more parents. I want to see more people using this. And for that, I need business support. I want to see this being approved for CPD training so it can help with top-down learning in businesses. And ultimately, my long-term vision is to see this developed for schools and the national curriculum. So I've got a lot of forward visioning to do this week. Stick with your forward visioning about all the wonderful times you're going to have in the future with your teenager. And let's create change through creating a safe space for talking. So hugs and healing from me for today. And I will see you next Tuesday with another episode of the Parenting Teens podcast. Bye bye for now.